Gerald Taiaiake Alfred is a full professor in Indigenous governance in the Department of Political Science. He specializes in studies of traditional governance, the restoration of land-based cultural practices, and decolonization strategies. Tanse Taiaiake, welcome to the show.
Tanse, Sego.
Big
Tanse,
things.
Tai.
Tanse, Colette, I recognize that voice.
This is one of your students here in studio with me this morning.
One of my favorite students.
Oh. It's intense times here in Canada, Tai.
Yeah, it is. It's good to see.
Yeah? It's scary.
For a lot of people, it is. I got some messages already. People saying I'm scared now.
Yeah.
And it's just,
What does, in your perspective, what does this mean? What do we need to be doing?
Well, I think the fear is a sign of change. I think, and people understand that things are changing or that things need to change. And I think even though people can see it heading in a direction that might lead to positive things in the future, the fact that there is change happening is always scary for everybody. And, you know, we criticize a lot, rightly so, the way things are today. But anytime you tell people that their lives are going to change, there's a lot of fear, and especially when there's such a hostile and aggressive adversary on the other side of the barrier, so to speak, on this political issue. You know, the possibility of change being a positive thing is entirely dependent on actually defeating the ideology and the political power of the government of Canada, and that's a daunting thing. And so even though we can see if we all unify, if we're strong, if we act smart, if we're courageous, and if we do what's necessary, things will turn out better. There's still a heck of a lot of work to do, and there's always the possibility that we may not succeed in this round of struggle. And I think a lot of people are starting to sense that now. And a lot of people who have been in politics for a long time are dedicated, to causing change. But there's a lot of people who, and the name of the movement that we're talking about says it all, idle no more. There's a lot of people who feel that, they've been idle. They haven't really done anything. They've been talking about it. And this is their first real foray into political movement and political contention. And that's just a scary thing.
With this idle no more movement, what's your perception? Is this a resurgence, blockading, standing on the highway, rallying? Is this, to you, what resurgence should be looking like?
Well, it depends what the objective is. I mean, to me, when I talk about Indigenous resurgence, the way I understand it is that it's a linked movement that's cultural, spiritual, political, and physical, everything all together. And if it's just protest and complaining to the government about the laws that they're about to pass or have passed now, then no, it's not really. It's just another round of expression of frustration at our colonization. But if it's linked to real change in people from our colonized mentality and behaviors amongst ourselves, if it changes the way that our communities are organized and governed, if it really gets down deep into the whole source of the problem, which is the Indian Act system itself and the Indian Act, then I think it's resurgence, because it means exactly what it says. It's a resurgence of our true self. It's a resurgence of our traditional governments, of our chiefs and clan mothers, and our spirituality. And if it doesn't go that far, all it's doing is really validating the power of the Canadian government over us, because we're standing up and complaining to the person who has authority over us to treat us right. And of course I understand the frustration of people, and I'm with them on it, but it needs to be seen, I think, as the very first step in a long march. This is an awakening for a lot of people. It needs to not be the objective, protest. It needs to be the thing that really motivates people and wakes people up so that they're willing to go further and further on all of those fronts, on their personal transformation, on the way their communities are governed, and then in unifying and strategizing in order to confront the agenda of the government of Canada. So if this is part of that, then it's a fundamental shift in the way that we've been going for the last 20 years in Native politics, really. And I really hope it is, but it's yet to be seen. But protests themselves don't really mean anything.
In part of this resurgence movement, how do you imagine allies participating and engaging?
Well, I think that we're faced with a situation where you have a vast landscape of ignorance on the part of the Canadian public, and so when the Canadian government really feeds off that. It creates ignorance, and then it feeds off it in order to maintain the situation that it's created in regard to us being colonized and them using our lands to enrich themselves. And so I think the first order of business, so to speak, for the settler society is to educate themselves about the history and to educate themselves about the piece of land that they live on and claim as their property. If they can, after understanding the true history of the piece of land that they occupy, if they can say to themselves, I feel right and just and feel good that I'm here, then okay. But I would venture to say, 90% of the people in this country, if they understood the true history of the piece of land that they live on, would probably have some doubts about that. And then that's the kind of thing that we could utilize, the kind of self-doubt, the kind of the disconnect between the mythology of Canada and the reality of Canada will cause a lot of non-Native people to question their government, and then that's where we come in with the truth. And I think that's where we build an alliance, and really realizing that even with what I'm talking about here, if that does happen, there's a lot of people that are just dead set on being racist white supremacists in this country. And I don't think that we should expect everyone to be an ally. I think when you use the word ally, you're looking at people that have either never been convinced of the mythology of Canada or have been educated out of that and have a real commitment to making change. And those people can make change by being, in direct answer to your question, being advocates within their own system for change. I don't think we need people standing with us. I don't think we need people marching with us. There's enough of us to do that if that's what we want to do. There's even enough of us to have a political confrontation or a physical confrontation. But what we need are people in the non-Native society working on their own members and working on their own governments to bring light to what's happening here, and then also to support. And that's kind of in a political sense. In a practical sense, from having been around political conflicts over the course of my career a couple of times, there's just the practical support that's necessary too sometimes. And I think that's something that settler allies can look at. But the basic point I'm making is that this is our movement, this is our problem, and it's up to Native people to take the initiative and be the ones to be at the front and solve this problem. And white allies can be people, or not necessarily white allies, any Canadian ally can sit back and listen and then take direction as to what's necessary in terms of what's been asked by the Native people.
There's fear I see division within our own people. Part of the decolonization process is what's happening now. What are some things that you suggest we do within our own communities when we're struggling with people saying, actually, you know what, maybe this legislation's good for our people? What are some of the things that we can be talking about within our own communities?
Well, I think public debate and arguments and even conflict are necessary. People think that a lot of people seem to think that conflict is all bad. Like when you mention that word, we shouldn't have internal conflict. Well, how can we? I always ask, how can we not have internal conflict if we're colonized and our mentalities have been shaped by the government, and many of our people are assimilated to mentalities that are colonial? how can we expect to move towards a more traditional mindset and a more authentic mindset in our communities without conflict on the intellectual or political level? We have to bring those out, and we have to allow people to put their ideas out there and ask them to justify them. I think a lot of times people now take the position that you're automatically right if the position you're advocating is one that maintains peace and good relations with the government and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's not the case. In fact, if someone's advocating peace and good relations with this government, they're actually advocating the destruction of our people. And so anybody who puts that position forward should be forced to justify it.
But don't we come from the two-row wampum? Didn't we do the peace? Isn't that where we come from?
Yeah, after some conflict where we defended ourselves and established a respect in the mind of the person that was going to be having this relationship with us. All treaties are all treaties. I won't pick and choose two-row wampum, number treaties, whatever. If they're a real treaty, they come as a result of conflict between people where they either politically or physically have been in conflict in order to establish a relationship of power and respect between each other. And then there's a relationship that's solidified. You can't really have a treaty that means anything when one person is on his knees and the other person is standing up over him ready to kick him in the face. That's not a treaty. And that's not peace, really, is it?
And that's what we're seeing with Teresa Spence starving herself.
She's doing a great thing in order to, I believe, I don't know, I'm not her, I don't know her mind, but the way that I see it, and I think a lot of people see it, is that she's doing a great thing because what she's doing is challenging the moral authority of the government of Canada. And I should say, this may be controversial, and also the collaborators with the government of Canada, the people who are working with the government of Canada, to try to define what it is to be Native and try to fix our future for us. She's telling everybody they're wrong, and she's telling everyone not only that they're wrong, but they're morally wrong, and that she's willing to die for the truth of what it is to be Native, in spite of what all the collaborators and the government of Canada are trying to set up for us as an assimilative future. She's saying, no, I want to survive, and I want to survive in peace, but I don't want to have to give up who I am, and I don't want to have to survive in this kind of psychic hell of being caught in between my true self and this kind of assimilative self that you're creating for me. And I think it's a very profound thing, what she's saying.
I think she's also challenging Canadians' ethics and morality because they're standing by and watching this and not reacting or responding.
That's true. Unfortunately, not enough Canadians know. I'm sorry. Not enough Canadians know what's going on, but that'll happen. It'll come, and then there'll be a reckoning. You know, people will start to realize that her and the other elders, that I understand there's a few more that are kind of fast having a hunger strike in solidarity with her. When these people start moving into it being more than just a few days to weeks, and when the seriousness of it dawns on people, yeah, Canadians will be having to wake up to the fact that they have Native elders and leaders starving themselves in a hunger strike because of the way that Canada is in relation to Natives. And then I think that's going to be a powerful moral statement.